You're listening to Socialist World, a podcast from the Independent Socialist Group.
What do we want? Housing! When do we want it? Now! When do we want jobs? When do we want them? Now! What do we want? Abolish ICE! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Trump out! When do we want it? Now! If we don't get it, shut it down!
Wow! You've got the voice for this, I just realized.
Who does?
Stevie.
Me?
100%.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've always hated my voice. That means so much to me.
Sounding
You're
really
humble
good.
about it too. That's the good
Found
thing.
the talent.
Cool. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Well done.
Hi, my name's Angus McFarland. I'm in the main branch of the Independent Socialist Group for about 3.5 years, and I am a carpenter and a father.
Hi, my name is Stevie Rising. I am a member of the Independent Socialist Group from Boston. I've been in the org about 3 years, and I work as an admin assistant at a local law school.
Hi, my name is Chris Sampieri. I'm a letter carrier, a member of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch 18. I live in Massachusetts, and I've been a union and socialist activist since 2004, and I'm a new member of the ISG.
Hi, I'm Jeff Booth. I'm a member of the Independent Socialist Group, ISG. I'm in the Boston branch of our organization, that's Boston, Massachusetts. I work at a university library, and I'm in a union called AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees.
Hi, I'm Peggy Wang. I'm a member of the Boston branch of the Independent Socialist Group. I've been in ISG for about 6 years now, and I am a member of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, largest union in all of New England, and I work as an animation studio manager at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design.
And my name is Milena. I am a founding member of the main branch, but I've been organizing with ISG since 2018-ish, since early college. I'm also a graduate student at the moment in the USM, University of Southern Maine, Social Work School, and I'm also a member of the University of Maine Graduate Workers Union, UAW. Cool. Are we all ready? Thumbs up? Okay, great. So, what was your first encounter with socialism, or maybe what was the cultural messaging around socialism that you received prior to organizing? Who wants to start?
Well, if we go chronologically, I'll jump in. But
Perfect.
Without using the term boomer ever again, I was born in the 1960s. So I grew up in the Cold War as a child and adolescent, and socialism was a very bad thing for a lot of people. I grew up in a working class neighborhood where I remember when the 1968, I think it was, or perhaps 1972 election was around, and literally on the bus to school, kids were chanting 2468. Who do we assassinate? Humphrey, Humphrey, yay! That's gives you an indication of how things were. Also, I had my best friend's father routinely called MLK a commie, just like a lot of other people did in that area. I grew up in upstate New York, in and around Schenectady, New York. But not everyone felt that way. And I did. And a lot of that stuff, like the sort of ambient racism in the air that came out from time to time and the political conservatism, it just didn't stick with me, really. I didn't go along with it. Although my first introduction to socialism was really not socialism through radical politics, was through anarchism. It was easier to find anarchist materials in the high school library and the public library. And they assigned us Anthem in 8th grade, that short story by Ayn Rand. So I started reading Ayn Rand, and I read everything and got really disgusted with it by the end of it on my own, sort of. But then, I think I first ran into socialism in a real way my senior year in high school, where I went out and started to look for independent candidates to campaign for. And I started out with Anderson, who was an ex-Republican running as an independent in 1980, I believe it was. Ended up in something called the Citizens Party locally in Schenectady, where they were running an independent candidate. Someone that used to be in the Socialist Workers Party was running. So I was going door to door with that, talking to that person, listening to The Clash. I had just discovered The Clash. So that was really how I got interested in socialism. And then my first year of college, after already working in a factory for 2 years, or different factories in upstate New York, in the bakery industry, believe it or not, it's an industry, a big one. I read the Communist Manifesto when I got to college in a philosophy class. And the professor was very ambivalent about it, but felt like he had to assign it for some reason, I don't know why, but I just really liked it. It really spoke to me. It just really made sense. And I literally read the first volume of Capital the following year when I was working in the factories again in the summers and holidays. And it seemed to make sense to me. I don't recommend that because when I read it later, I realized I didn't understand a lot of it, but I don't recommend like tackling the whole volume 1 of Capital in a summer where you're working 60-hour weeks and sweating all the time. Very little air conditioning back then. So, but it seemed to make sense to me. And that kind of got me propelled. And then I eventually transferred colleges to Boston and started running into socialist groups. So I'll leave it at that. So my introduction to socialism was not a smooth one and not a coherent one at first. But I say one more thing real quick. The post-war upswing is overrated. There was a lot of poverty. There was a lot of violence. My father was working 3 jobs before other people. My brother and sister dropped out of high school. It's not all it's meant to be. Michael Harrington, who went on to found DSA, actually wrote a book about poverty in the early 60s. So take a breath before you swallow the stuff about boomers and the post-war upswing, because the conditions were right for becoming a socialist, but the propaganda, the ideological superstructure was very anti-socialist.
The picture of you reading Capital sweating in a factory actually seems perfect to me.
Not in the factory, but before I fell asleep in the middle of the day because I was working third shift a lot.
Oh,
whatever.
man.
So my family history with socialism goes back some ways, right? My grandfather was a Communist Party member in his youth, and actually testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee. So he at that point in his life was no longer a member of any Communist Party, but he was a journalist, and he told Joe McCarthy to go pound sand in so many words, which I'm very, very proud of. And then my father and my mother were both friendly to socialism. They were both generally on the left, but I spent most of my teenage years and youth not really politically active until the birth of my son. He's about 5 now. When he was born, I really had to change the way I thought about things and related to politics. And I realized that I couldn't just leave the world as it was, sort of unchallenged, and look him in the eye when he grew up. I had to be able to tell him that I did everything I could with, Trump and Nazis running around and all of the just wild stuff that's been going on in the world. It was time to get involved. So, and also I had sort of been a little bit involved with Bernie stuff previously, but then I saw what happened through those elections and how Bernie basically capitulated and wasn't exactly the viable alternative that I had thought he was. Then I really decided that it was time to get involved in a more independent politics.
I'm, I guess, either an older Gen Z or a younger millennial. And I remember in school when we learned, very briefly about socialism or communism, it was probably in the context of the Cold War or in other situations where some nation needed to be saved from this. It was always painted negatively. Like Jeff said, calling someone a commie was like a sick burn, but I didn't really know what that meant. I think once I understood more of what socialism was actually about, and this was maybe my freshman year of high school in 2010, I remember not really understanding why that was so controversial.
Well, if I can hop in, Angus was talking about Bernie, and for me, when I graduated college, Bernie Sanders was running a campaign for president. It's 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. And we'd read stuff growing up, all this kind of dystopian novels, and they always, for some reason, resonated with me in terms of social critiques and stuff. But I had a lot of friends in college who were working multiple jobs, constantly had to go home to their hometown on the weekends and work at the grocery store and things like that, and just insane amounts of debt. And when the kind of Sanders campaign was talking about the huge wealth inequity, they need to tax the rich in these corporations. And, he was running as a socialist, quote unquote. And I had been really excited about the ideas of Medicare for all, universal health care, taking on the 1%. But I was at one of these Bernie events where someone who was part of the group that we were, ISG was formerly a different organization, but one of the members of that group, came around to the group of folks I was sitting with and was like, hey, we produced this paper. We're this socialist group in the city. And I was like, oh yeah, what is socialism? What actually is it? And I bought that paper, and then I started getting introduced to socialism that way because it wasn't about Bernie. He was running quote unquote as a socialist, but I was like very much interested in the ideas behind his campaign, or whatever the ideas that he was raising. And yeah, that was my introduction, just like very much materially seeing what was going on around me. The recession was really, really impactful in terms of like, I was just getting into college right when that was hitting and watching people getting evicted and losing their homes. Meanwhile, these banks are getting bailed out. The insane amount of money that Obama and the two corporate parties put in to bail out these big banks. Meanwhile, yeah, people are being thrown into the streets, which is horrific. Occupy Wall Street, also a big part of that too. But didn't really see a way forward with Occupy because it was just like these protests and gatherings that happened that just seemed to like fizzle out. But it was really, really disappointing to see with the Sanders campaign how that went because, he was saying all these things, talking about Hillary. I hated Hillary Clinton. I mean, she was the war hawk. She was terrible in many, many ways. But the second, you just saw the system at play. And after the whatever DNC convention was just like, okay, I am not the nominee. We got to vote for Hillary. I was like, are you shitting me right now? Are you like, this is insane. Seeing the whole process of those primaries and that election go, I just turned toward independent politics, voted for Jill Stein that year. Yeah, it was just such hypocrisy. And I just couldn't, I refused to buy into the lesser evilism because it just was, such a contradiction. Yeah.
Definitely. I think too, like the Sanders campaign is, I think, a lot of people's, at least that we're talking to right now, like in the main branch, kind of first sort of step into like kind of quote unquote left space. And then as you outlined so well, Peggy, like face then like intense disappointment with the structures at play here. So I think that was hugely formative for my own journey as well, sort of into socialism. Like, well, this seems right, it sounds right, but it's not really doing what it says it's doing. So where else do we look? And I think what I'm hearing a lot from everybody so far is this like frustration that didn't really have an avenue until we found this alternative. Was it for anybody any particular radicalizing event over time? Or like more of an overtime small thing here, eviction here, job loss here, or maybe there was like a specific something.
I've only told the story 100 times, but I like telling it because it's going to be my 101st. We all should do this if we're activists. But usually I don't start off with this, but Angus brought up family history. My grandfather was a World War I veteran in Italy, and he was a black shirt in Italy, right? Weird, huh? Yeah, boy, how did that work out for him? Boy, I'm sure he died before I was born, but I'm sure he's rolling in his grave knowing how I turned out, which is great. So he sounds like a winner of a guy. But when it came to, me as a person, like what happened was I was pretty young. I grew up in a town and I was a young man, isolated and kind of alone in a small town. And I'll be honest, I was kind of a homophobe, kind of a racist, kind of that stuff, just kind of, because everyone else in this town was, every adult was. Then I got a job working at UPS. And what I learned is I worked with black people, I worked with gay people, I worked with immigrants, I worked with women, I worked with all kinds of different people. And eventually I learned we're all kind of the same, right? Like this, what is that? Why did I even think this was how it's supposed? No, it's where it was in the city. So it was a bit more of a diverse workforce, but also we were in a union. And the union education got me to learn. And luckily I was a young kid, but the older workers, they were like, the real enemy is the boss who's screwing you over. And that boss can be any color too. It doesn't really matter. All this petty crap you've been taught your whole life is not true. It's all about where you stand. Either you're a worker or you're a boss. And the bosses were just loving it, how divided we were getting. And that made sense to me. It started clicking, and I really started viewing things a lot differently after my real life experience with the Teamsters when I was a young kid. Also, I was a big history fan. I love reading history. So I would probably like to thank Matt Damon in his great movie Good Will Hunting, when he said, he goes, if you want to read a real history book, they'll knock you on your ass. Read People's History of the United States of America by Howard Zinn. And I'm like, you know what? I like history books. I'd like to, and that book did knock me on my ass. The history I never knew, and is absolutely a Boston moment. If you're from Boston, it's Dunkin' Donuts and Good Will Hunting and throwing your eyes when you say "ka." But like, it was really like, wow, that book really changed everything. And it was around the same time the Iraq War was breaking out at this point too. And I learned about this guy named Eugene Debs in the Socialist Party of America. And I learned so much about when he spoke out against the war. He went to jail, imprisoned by a liberal president at the time. And I'm like, this is the party I think I should be a part of, and I joined it, nice people. Wasn't really what I was looking for, but I stuck around. And then eventually I was at a May Day rally, and it was someone from Social Alternative handing me a flyer for their conference. And I'm like, oh, all right, I'll check them out. And then I checked them out, and I went to the meeting, and I was blown away at the professionalism, how well I've never seen such level of professionalism, organizing, timing. It was at I think at UMass Boston at the time. I know Turning Point would love that, but and also I think that's where I saw Jeff speak for the first time way back. So I was really impressed, and I'm like, this is the group that has the professionalism and the smarts and the knowledge. I want in, so I joined. And around the same time, it's around 2008. And it was the Wall Street bailouts, and kind of what Peggy was saying too about how you saw clearly the capitalist system was failing, and all these people were losing their homes, losing their jobs. I was included by getting laid off of my job, and there was very little help for us. And this is under Obama. But who got all the help? Deutsche Bank, J.P. Morgan, Sachs, all these, and then these people were throwing lavish parties and getting golden parachutes. And meanwhile, I can't get a job at all. I'm 25 at this point. I should be. I think, well, I'll get a job, and no one was hiring. It was a bad time, and I realized then who the system was really for in real life. This is what woke me up to it. That it's not just theory. This is the real world, and you're seeing what a capitalist government does. So that really pushed me in that direction. And then in that time, I read this book called Teamster Rebellion by Farrell Dobbs. And for me, that was the whole, I'm reading a book. Unions are the way for me. Everyone's got a different avenue. It's fine. But for me, it was reading that book that I'm like, I want to go into labor. And ever since I've read the book, like I said, I'm big. I'm the union steward now at my place. Unions have been the way for me. Organizing unions, fighting for unions, making them more democratic, making them fighting for once is something I've dedicated my life to. So, and the ISG just fit in perfectly. They have a good, solid union program. When we had a rally for the letter carriers, it was Peggy showed up, and when an international speaker from Germany came up, and that really impressed all the members. And not everyone there in my groups of socialists. There's some Trump people there too, but they want fighters. And they saw ISG people speaking up, and that really left a good impression. And this was the group for me. So that's why I joined. So thanks.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you.
So I think for me, it's definitely been more of a slow, lifelong thing. I think that something that really primed me to develop class consciousness as something I could name later on in life was growing up in a very working class family on the Cape. And for those of you listening, not from New England, I'm referring to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which is, if you look at a map of Massachusetts, there's kind of this little bit on the right that looks like a flexing arm. And there's like one bridge, I think now two, that go from the rest of Massachusetts to the Cape. And that's it. It feels very isolated. It's very much a vacation community. And people who go there to vacation, there's not really a lot of consideration for people who live there year round. I think people don't consider that people live there year round. We did. And my parents, we didn't have a lot of money. My parents worked hard. My parents worked a lot. They both had two jobs at any given time. My mom was a certified part-time nurse and still had to be a part-time bartender. And my dad would do all kinds of odd jobs. He worked at a local gallery. He built bikes for a department store. He did sound for bands. He did like freelance graphic design projects from home. I feel like my dad was always working. And still I had to listen to them worry about food, electricity, gas, how they were going to pay for, my field trips, my school stuff. And they would try not to tell me about that stuff, but I would hear anyway, just because, they were so stressed out. I'm sure it's hard to contain. Yeah, and I feel like the wealth divide is especially pronounced in a place like that. Of course, like the wealth gap is widening everywhere, right? But on the Cape, you have these very working class families who are struggling to piece together enough money to stay there. And then you have these people who have like beach houses that they use for 2 to 3 months out of the year. And yeah, I think that radicalized me. I didn't understand why my parents had to work so hard and we had what seemed like so little. I had a good childhood because they made it work, but we had what seemed like so little compared to other people, and they worked so hard all the time. And, then I would get older and me and my friends would work in these businesses during the summers, during school vacations for these like ruthless local like restaurant owners, shop owners. And that's when I learned, small business isn't necessarily any more ethical because these guys running these places where, they don't care if they work a 16-year-old 12 hours, you know what I mean? Because that's cheap labor, baby. And then, growing up, hearing my generation would likely never afford a house. We'll have record student debt, all these avocado toast jokes. We'd have more money if we just stopped eating out or buying coffee or whatever. I didn't eat out. I didn't buy a lot of coffee. I still didn't have any money. Chris talked about the Iraq War. I think that played a part for me too. I would hear people say we're fighting for our freedom. And even at like 15, 16, I don't actually remember when that was, however old I was, they would say, oh, we're fighting for our freedom. And I would just kind of think, why is our freedom over there? What does that have to do with us? And we're spending all this money on this war when me and my family can't pay rent. It seemed like people who needed the help weren't getting the help.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that some of what Chris and also what Stevie said reminded me of, or just made me think about this one event or a series of events turned you into a socialist, right? I mean, honestly, a series of events like Stevie was getting into, but some events are more important than others, right? And some events you don't experience till later. So I was in junior high, I think, when the 1974-75 recession hit, and it made no impact on me at that moment. But when I went into high school, by the end of the decade, I had experienced massive cutbacks in the public school I went to, whereas like my older siblings had been on field trips and stuff, all that stuff was gone. It just didn't exist anymore. I was in classes that were too large. There was just, people working harder in general. My father told me to go out and find some money for college, right? So I go to a kind of jobs program that still kind of existed in the area, but we made just a little too much money for me to get a job there. So then, as I mentioned earlier, I finally got a job in some factories in Schenectady and Albany. And like Chris, that opened my eyes politically to a lot of things. I was already transitioning from kind of vague anarchist influence to socialist influence, but not in an organization yet. And basically through that, doing some canvassing for an independent candidate, a progressive independent, kind of a left, and then working with all sorts of people in a union factory where I made enough money to save for college. Still didn't think it was enough, and actually went into ROTC my first year of college and then decided not to continue for various reasons. That's another story. But I was desperate for money to go to college, and the union factory job allowed me to go to college. So Chris mentioned being dedicated to unions. I mean, I could tell you from experience in the unions I've been in 3 different unions, at least, I think, 3 different ones. Some people, a lot of people have great loyalty to that experience because it made their lives concretely better. So, for example, we went on strike at one of the factories I was working in Albany, New York, up on a hill. We go on strike. Somehow the cops show up the minute we're going on strike. We walked out like it was a movie. We all walked out together and shut everything down. But then the cops are on us, Where'd that come from? Well, they got a call from the boss. They got a call from this, lead supervisor in the factory, and the cops ran. They just showed up. Boom, boom, boom. Their masters called, and they're in our shit, basically, really quick. And that you learn a lot from that, and you see people sacrifice on the picket line, literally, like stand in front of vans with scabs coming through. And that just makes a huge impact. But here's what also was happening at the same time, before, during, and after the strike was, I tried to articulate politics to people in the heat of the moment, and all that anarchist stuff was useless. And I don't have time to go into that right now, but it just didn't do anything. But the socialist stuff I was starting to learn, revolutionary socialist ideas, they resonated with people. People were interested in that, and especially interested in how that could help our union and our struggles there, like the strike. And also there was a big rally in 1981 in Washington after PATCO. And I went to that and so on. And I was meeting people in Schenectady that had been in the Socialist Workers Party, that had done, that really entered factory work from college, which was a big mistake actually in their case. They didn't sort of organically go into it like I did. And they were academics and stuff, not working class. But anyway, that's another story too. But they gave me some history, and of the movement, the political movement in the area in upstate New York. And I found out that I already knew this, but I found out most of my family had worked in General Electric. Schenectady was like a one factory town, basically a huge General Electric plant. And there was a big strike in '69, which I remembered from a different angle, just as just a kid. After that strike, GE wanted to fire as many workers as they could, or lay them off, or not hire more, that kind of stuff. And the union, my father used to work at GE before he became a truck driver. Anyway, whole history there, seeing GE go after people. That's one of the events, right? Seeing them, pretty much bust a strike, not fully, going on strike ourselves, or myself, when I was in the bakery workers union, and we won our strike. It was probably one of the last big strikes in the area that won for a while, and we won things that made my life better immediately, in terms of pay, in terms of not having to work forced overtime, and in terms of some health benefits and stuff like that. So yeah, the events when I was starting to become a socialist, there were a lot of them, like I already mentioned, Patco, you name it. And it was, and also the deregulation and inflation under Carter. Again, all these things processed in different ways when you're younger, but then you realize, oh, I had to do that because of this. I had to work there because of this, you know what I mean? And also one last thing about the union effect on socialism is, I think Chris kind of got into this in a way, the union activists, and I'm really young, right? I'm working there with other young kids. They hired a bunch of kids when I started when I was 17, barely. And basically, I would see the supervisors go after us, the young kids. And a friend of mine working right in basically a assembly line, so to speak, right across from me, the supervisor drove him to tears, saying, "How dare you call in sick? You can't call in sick." And the kid came with a fever. He was really sick. He was a friend of mine, and he started to cry. And you don't cry in that environment. You just don't. I mean, it's mostly men, ex-cons and all sorts of people working there. And you don't cry, but no one got on his case. No one said, "Oh, you broke down in front of a supervisor." What they did was they said, "Go to the shop steward." And he did. And the next day, that same supervisor that drove him to tears had to come in front of our whole line and apologize to us. That's the kind of union militancy that's flammable material when you're also reading Marx and you're also like learning about socialism all at once. Boom, boom, boom. So a series of events is the short answer to that. But
I love what you said with it's flammable material. I feel like I totally get that. Like sometimes you encounter stuff just at the right time and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
When I've encountered ISG first, one of our leading ISG members was a teaching assistant in a class I was in at Clark University. And I kept on just like feeling like I was hitting my head against a wall. Like I had all of these sort of big ideas where I was like, man, like my parents are working a lot and like you still can't afford anything. And like, our healthcare is super bad, or like, it's really, you can't really afford to get sick, or like, we have these scholarships at school and what have you. And all these like kind of big invisible forces happening, but no really way to name them. And then I met somebody just at the right time, as you said, who had offered some alternatives and let me be outraged that there weren't answers like beforehand, right? And I really feel like flammable material is such a good phrase for it, because from there I started working in international development and like in social work and in crisis. And all of those are contexts where you're repeatedly exposed to people who are facing some of the most intense cruelty that capitalism really has to offer. Like we're talking like, families of 6 comes into the office with a close to $1 million bill from a, mega hospital, right?
Oh,
and with
God.
no insurance and like no housing insecurity. And you're just looking at this like, this cannot work. This can't be it. This certainly can't, like, this isn't working, so something else might. And it was just the right time where I got access to the material and, 2 and 2 sort of clicked together.
Can I add one other thing real quick
Please
about
do.
unions and socialism? That whole theme that we started opened up a little bit. Right now with Trump in power and Trump and company in power and the Democrats accommodating to Trump and company in power, and there's, this kind of narrative, especially online, of, all these people voted for Trump and all that. Well, most Americans didn't vote for Trump. And anyway, we can unpack that a lot. Trump's approval rating right now, 40% going down. But also Democrats' approval rating, 39% or wait, 37%, I think it was, and going down. Anyway, that's maybe later, and we'll talk about that later. But I just want to say with unions, like Chris mentioned, there's some Trump supporters in his union, and but they like the speakers from ISG about that. They like the socialists speaking at a union rally, right? So my experience was in a union in a conservative place right? Upstate New York, a lot, not so much in the cities, but around there. Some people coming in from other areas working in the cities, a lot of people. And basically, the union was able to overcome that, including within the union being able to talk about radical ideas or whatever you want to call them, socialist ideas and others, without people going crazy, because you were in the union with them, right? And they saw you went on strike with them. And they saw that, you didn't like it when the supervisor was trying to humiliate people and being an idiot. So basically, when we went on strike, I didn't know how my parents were going to react. My father had been in a union before. He was a truck driver, then he was a dispatcher. My mom was technically in the same union I was in, but in the clerical kind of wing of it. So basically, the minute they heard there was going to be a strike, they called me and they said, don't cross the picket line. They had one word, they had one sentence, don't cross the picket line. I go, of course I'm not going to cross the picket line. What are you talking about? They said, just don't cross the picket line. And I said, I'm not going to cross the picket line, And it wasn't just like, the cliche of fear of violence in the picket line. All the violence in the picket line was the cops and the scabs, and us defending ourselves. I mean, one person who I worked with who used to eat lunch with the supervisors used to drive me crazy. She did it to spy on them, basically. And when the strike happened, she got her foot run over by a scab van and was broken. We had to bring her to the hospital. So my parents weren't coming from the violence on the picket line thing. They were coming from I used to be in a union thing. I never crossed the picket line. I would never think of crossing a picket line. And that kind of consciousness is not available to a lot of people right now. Maybe you have 1 in 10 people in the country in unions, but you have 70% approval for unions. There's a lot of ways and a lot of space, as they like to say, to organize people that you think are beyond the pale in terms of politics. Not everybody, of course. Some people are beyond the pale, but there are people that will listen in a certain context, and in other contexts they won't listen. And a union, or even organizing a union or supporting a union in solidarity, that's one context where you can talk to people seriously about stuff that they don't get much to talk about. They don't have much time to talk about people about those things.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying kind of reminds me a bit. We talk about in ISG just sometimes when the left is weak, the right grows. And I think something that, Jeff, as you were talking about, like both the police on picket lines and also, organizing as a socialist, like during the BLM protests, especially when George Floyd was murdered, that was a very eye-opening thing in that, like, the police aren't here for working people, and it has been brutally clear, especially when there are picket lines and mass killings of working people, especially Black working people. Toward the end of the BLM kind of movement, there was more class consciousness and things like that. But I think something that the left lacks, which I think ISG does a good job of, is what do we do about it? I needed to see something that had the potential to replace capitalism. And it wasn't until, ISG had this online event about what way forward for the Black Lives Matter movement, and putting forward, things like defund the police, community control and accountability of the police, actually pointed a way for what we can do about police brutality, and also an international perspective on that, because this happens everywhere around the world. We recently have seen mass protests, especially led by young people in Nepal, in Indonesia, and police brutality exists everywhere in the world, in other countries. And I think being very clear about how this is a class struggle, I definitely feel like it was very different to finally be able to actually organize in a revolutionary socialist group and be coordinated about it. We have ideas that guide what we're doing, and it isn't just throwing things at the wall and trying to figure out what's happening. Because I used to do that. I was part of various kind of climate change groups, trying to stop climate change groups, or working on various little campaigns here and there. And all these issues really need to be united as one effort. The fight against climate change, the fight against racism and sexism, fight against attacks on immigrants and attacks on unions too. It's all the same fight. And I think really being in a socialist group like ours, and very critically pointing toward, this can't go toward voting blue. It's what killed the Black Lives Matter movement, those who were quote unquote leading it. There wasn't any intentional really leadership, unfortunately. We need to make that explicit. Working people need to get organized and have elected leadership, elected representation outside of any corporate control, any corporate funding interests. And so that really needs to be outside both the Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, if I could just circle back on what Jeff said too earlier about the police and everything, and what we were led, as kids and then as older, you're led to believe that the police are neutral, right? That like if you're on a picket line, they're neutral. The government's neutral. They're not. If it's a worker boss, they're in the middle. And very quickly, you realize that by looking at things. For example, in my town, there was Republic, a company that's notoriously trying to bust their union every chance they get, and they're currently on strike. But I had one of those Facebook memories that said, on this date, and Republic was used to pick up the trash for our town. And what was interesting is that when the scabs were operating, the police were there to protect them on the line, protecting, making sure they can be scabs because they were getting harassed and getting yelled at, and their feelings were getting hurt by the union workers and their supporters. When there's a picket line I went to, it was the Insomnia cookie strike. The IWW was actually organizing that. We had a picket line going in front of the store at night. There was probably a group of about 20 of us. At this rally, there must have been, the cops showed up at night. There must have been 45. There was more police than us. And they came out at a cookie store at night when it was close to, it was pretty much closing at this point anyway. It was late night. There's only two people working or whatever, but the overwhelming force that the police were going to use, because like we were, and the cop goes, "You're blocking the sidewalk." As he was saying that, someone walked right around him and went into the store. It did, you can contradict that by just doing it, but you realize that our government, the police, the National Guard, they get called it, they're not neutral. They picked a side. And it's not to protect us. As a joke, too, and my final point, too. Whenever I see police there, I'll talk to the workers, and usually they'll allege wage theft, and they'll talk about it. So I'll go to the police officer. I go, "Excuse me, officer, I'd like to report a crime. Wage theft has been and I bring the two workers with me. I go, "Now, they said that this boss, the guy in that store, he's been doing wage theft and ripping these people off, and they got 2 hours shaved off their thing. Are you going to go in and maybe arrest them and bring them in or anything?" And the cop would just, coldly ignore me or look away from me. They're not there for us. You could tell them, if I put in, now if that worker put their hand in the cash register and took the money out from the boss, they would be in handcuffs in 2 seconds. Right. But when it's one of us who get money taken out of our paychecks, oh, well, you can file a complaint with the attorney general. And then maybe in 6 months, is not even going to call you back because it took 2 hours out? Of course not. You're in a non-union situation. You can't file a grievance. But you see how the system is rigged against working class. Wage theft takes billions of dollars out of working class people's pockets, and it goes into their pockets. But like I said, stick your hand in the register and take $2 out and see how quickly the cops are called and shown up to arrest you for theft. So that's just my point about one thing I did learn a lot about real life in a union. You get to see the class war more starkly, but yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
So for me, just as how I got involved with ISG and a little bit more, it was the birth of my son, and like I said before, wanting to work, to try and make a better world for him. But the other thing about having a child is it really locks you into work, right? So I, for a long time, had felt like I was a musician, right? And so I felt like, all these jobs that I have are just kind of temporary, get me through kind of jobs, because I'm really a musician, but I have to sort of work to survive. And I think when my son was born, I realized, I'm a worker. Like I have to work.
Right.
And there's no sort of way out of that, right, for me. And then I also realized, he's going to be a worker too, right? Regardless of how he may try to avoid it, right? And I think that's, when we talk about class consciousness, right? That's that moment when that grows, where you understand, I'm a working class person, so I need to start acting like a working class person, and I need to start fighting for the working class, right? Rather than just sort of trying to slither between the cracks. When I'm connected to society by this family, right? When I have these other people that I have to think about, then I need to interact with society in a new way, in a different way. So I went out looking, trying to get recruited. I went out looking for left
trouble.
groups, looking for trouble. Yeah. And I was looking for a clipboard, really. And I went, to a couple of different left groups activities and things, and I couldn't find anyone with a clipboard until Milena and Emery sidled up to me with a clipboard and a big stack of newspapers. And and then they really took me in hand and provided me with a lot of stuff to read and a lot of education and a lot of, really perspective that I had been lacking, and understanding of socialism that really changed the way I think about things. And I'm really glad that they did. So thanks, Melina. Thanks, Emery.
It's one of my like I'm not exaggerating, biggest accomplishments of my whole life is getting you recruited and meeting you in a parking lot, and here we are, 3 or 4 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, humongous. I think I think you so speak to it, Angus, where you kind of go out looking for something and it's really difficult to find actually in lots of cases. Jeff said too, like your sort of inroad to that was like anarchist books that you were getting assigned and like kind of finding or like material that just was publicly available to you. And I think that's part of the reason why we're doing this, we're expanding to audio media is like getting the ideas out there so people don't have to search as hard. I'm wondering if anyone else wants to speak to like how they ran into ISG specifically, or maybe what would soon become ISG.
Yeah, so I've only been a member about 3 years. Feels like nothing compared to some of our excellent seasoned members over here. But I ran into one of our members, Jai, at the Trans Resistance March here in Boston in 2022. I was new to Boston. I had just moved here end of 2021, and I was looking for community as, a gay, non-binary person. I wasn't really looking to get politically organized, although, I was angry. I needed to. And I, walked up to ISG's table and I had heard about socialism. I think that I would have called myself a socialist if I was more confident that I understood it. Because up to that point, I had pretty much seen like memes on the internet from like leftist meme pages talking about like, seizing the means of production and like, just in like a joking way, but serious. And I felt like I didn't have an understanding beyond memes, although I agreed with them. And I walked up to this ISG table and Jai was very nice. And he said, are you a socialist? Are you organized? I said, I think I am. I don't really know though. I don't really understand what it is, I think. And something that really spoke to me is he said that, ISG does study groups. Members can get together and read some theory or some history or something and like discuss it together, ask questions. And we bring that to, our work in the streets. And that meant a lot to me because I am someone, look, I have ADHD. I need somebody to hold me accountable to learn new things. Otherwise I will get distracted and abandon it. So that sounds like something I'd really like to participate in. And, of course you'd ask some members of our leadership and they would be like, well, we're not a study group. We do real work. And that's very true. However, the study group meant a lot to me because I felt that I was woefully underinformed. And so, I put my name down on Jai's sign up sheet and, I talked to Peggy and to Nick and found out that my values aligned, even though I don't think I would have been able to name my values, honestly. Like housing is a right. Minimum wage should be higher. Workers should have more control over their lives in general and the economy in general. I wouldn't have been able to vocalize these things, I think, but I learned how to in my discussions with Peggy and Nick and early study groups. And I was really inspired by that first conversation with Jai in this like spirit of collaboration, I think I would call it, with the study groups helping each other learn, which I think is still really true of all the work we do. We help each other learn. We stand in solidarity with each other in the streets and in our struggles. And yeah, ISG was really the first group I came in contact with. I didn't really, date around or anything, but I think even still, there's not really one I'd rather be a part of. I think it's the best aligned with what I think and how I think we need to fight for a better world. So, yeah.
If I could come in on that first running into ISG question. So for me, it's a little different. I helped start ISG, but the reason I helped start ISG was that for a long time I was in an organization called Socialist Alternative, and I was in the leadership different times in that organization, and they started to support the Democratic Party shorthand. Even prior to Sanders, there was kind of a move away from supporting the idea of a workers' party, a new political party for working people that would have some unions involved or as many as possible and have, be totally independent from the Democratic and Republican parties, run its own candidates, fight for a socialist program for that party if possible, but just, a political alternative for working people from the progressive and left and hopefully socialist perspective as it developed, right? That was really part of Socialist Alternative for a while, for a long time, but then that started to change even prior to 2016. And internally, there was a lot of discussion and debate about that. Then when Sanders hit the scene, that was sort of the floodgates for people, both in leadership and rank and file of Socialist Alternative, to embrace the Democratic Party in its various individual candidate forms. And in general, see that as a way forward for some sort of, I don't know, attempt at socialism. And so it's kind of in line with DSA, which was also growing at the time. So there were people in the leadership of SA, Socialist Alternative, that wanted to just dump the whole organization into DSA. There were others that were like, no, that's not a good idea, but they were adjacent to DSA in terms of their ideas, what they were doing. And then there were others, myself included, in the leadership and the rank and file that were like, no, we actually should be organizing independent of the Democratic Party. And yes, Sanders is a part of the Democratic Party, so therefore we should not endorse Sanders. We should obviously talk to Sanders supporters and support some of the programmatical things that he was putting forward theoretically. We support them on the ground. So in Seattle, for example, fighting for a $15 minimum wage and Shama Sawant's election out of that campaign, and then fighting on the Seattle City Council as the lone socialist for a $15 minimum wage. That was all still really good. But then it kept creeping over into the Democratic Party, the policies of the organization. So myself and others formed ISG. Most of us had been in Socialist Alternative. And we called ourselves the Independent Socialist Group on purpose because that indicates independence from the two big business corporate parties, the Democrats and Republicans, and independence from their class, from the capitalist class. We want independent working class political action. That's what we're about organizing, both organizing for revolutionary socialism and a revolutionary socialist organization, but at the same time trying to organize a broad workers' party so working people have something to vote for. Frankly, they don't right now. And the poll figures I gave earlier, it was lower than I said. It's 33% for the Democrats back in July and 40% for Trump, both falling in percentages. But also a similar poll, it might have been the same poll, but I think it was a different one, from the Cato Institute and YouGov. Oh yeah, it's a different poll, sorry. In March, I'm actually looking at an article in our paper, Socialism Today. Sorry for not having this memorized. The Cato Institute, as you know, is like a libertarian kind of right-wing thing, and YouGov, I think, is just a polling corporation. But anyway, they did this poll in March, and they called it a troubling picture, quote unquote. That's the direct quote. Because 62% of Americans aged 18 to 29 said they hold a favorable view of socialism. This is a troubling picture to them. For us, it's our bread and butter. It's our work. And we're very excited about that. And that's a good thing. And it also matches what you see in this, what you're listening to, what you see in this podcast. It matches what we run into in the street. However, there's a lot of different ideas about, how to get there and what socialism is and so on. But at a base level, 62% of Americans aged 18 to 29 say they have a favorable view of socialism. That's a good place to start. 34% say the same of communism, a favorable view of communism. Let's say that again, 34% of 18 to 29-year-old Americans. So the corporate media would have us believe that we all, are stuck in the duopoly of the two corporate parties. They have us to believe that Trump has a mandate. It's a lie. It's just that the working people, including the youth in this country, aren't that well organized right now. So our way of organizing and helping to organize is to help build a workers' party in this country. And that's what we're about. So again, back to the question just briefly of how you ran into ISG, how you got involved with ISG. There is a thread, a sort of thread between, is that the right term? I don't know. There's a through line between that early joining Socialist Alternative after checking out all sorts of groups. This is back in the 1980s, because other groups, and I don't have time to go into it, but they would have a certain attitude towards Stalinism or whatever that didn't really fit the way the world was going and what I thought real socialism was and so on. So I chose an organization that's, labeled Trotskyist. It's kind of a reductive label, but it's true. It's like Trotsky, a leader of the Russian Revolution, fought to keep the revolution very democratic, fought to keep workers' democracy, fought to have decision-making in the Soviet Union be about the Soviets, workers' councils. That's what that means. Soviet means workers' councils, big mass meetings, elected representatives on a worker's wage and all that kind of stuff, subject to recall. The Russian Revolution was extremely democratic. in its beginnings, and we can have a whole podcast about that. Would be brilliant. But other organizations, they don't take that position, basically towards workers' democracy on the left, or they think the Democratic Party is the way forward, like DSA. I rejected all that, but the way I went into social alternative was through its international organization, in a sense, the Committee for Workers International, which ISG is in political solidarity with. I met someone who was in the African Studies Library at Boston University, who was talking to me about anti-apartheid struggles in Africa, in African countries. And some of the first people I met in the CWI when I actually when I went over to Britain, which was where the headquarters of CWI was, and they quickly invited me over there for a conference, and I was like, okay, I can't afford it, but pay for the plane ticket and I'll go, and I went, and it just blew me away, because I went to Liverpool, I went to London. In Liverpool, I felt really at home. I was stayed with a working class family. They were like my family. I stayed in a housing project, better than the housing projects here. Still had funding at that time. It hadn't been the train spotting drug thing yet, and then the CWI supporters, the Socialist Party, formerly called Militant in Britain, they actually had a majority on this Liverpool City Council. 40-something city councillors supporting a socialist program, a real socialist program. And that has to see the working class being able to organize at that level had a huge, huge effect on me. And I thought in the US, the left groups I checked out, they had no workers involved, really. Some of them had some on a sort of underground basis, but most of them, they just didn't have very many workers in them. They were mostly students. All of a sudden I ran into the real deal. I realized there were other CWI supporters, a handful around the U.S., and I got involved. So when ISG started many years later out of SA, some of the same questions, these same questions in a way, on the left, we started it because we wanted independent political action for the working class, and we're internationalists. We're Trotskyists as well, and that brought us back into the CWI, Committee for Workers International. So that's a slightly different circuitous route into ISG, but there it is.
I know internationalism was a huge part of me joining as well. My immediate family is half from here, half from what people in Maine would call from away, which is its own conversation. And it was really important to me when I was looking for a socialist group, or maybe some activist group that I didn't really have the language for, was that, our politics were international. Because I think to focus on the U.S. is kind of on its own is to, only be seeing kind of out of one eye, so to speak. So it was incredibly important to me. And, I'm sure we can all speak to later on, like how robust I think sort of our like chapter or branch system is like within the CWI. But I mean, it was also a huge component of like actually joining for me, not just sort of being on my radar, but when I was at Clark, there was a whole event where members of, if I'm correct, our Nigerian section came to talk about the Black Lives Matter protests that were going on, and how drawing parallels and similarities and strategies that I said, whoa, as Peggy said earlier, like all of this is happening kind of in parallel internationally. Like it would be ridiculous to sort of stick in one place philosophically. So sort of on that note, I'm curious, what would folks on this call say to someone who's considering philosophically breaking from the two-party system?
So I am coming to people right now saying this who would call themselves Democrats. Because I was a Democrat. I don't know what to say to Republicans. This is for the Democrats. I would challenge them to come up with anything that the Democrats have done to actually help workers beyond buttering this or that demographic up with like all this big talk of like equality and like whatever, like Bernie Sanders saying that, yeah, I guess I would just challenge them to come up with anything the Democrats have actually done beyond like pretty words, promises of like equality and like every American or whatever. Like, what do they actually concretely do to improve anything or to be loyal to what their voters obviously want versus just like pandering to Republicans or being a super wishy-washy sort of like, what's the word, opposition, but not really to the Republicans. Like, what do they do beyond just stand in the way sometimes of things getting worse? How did they make anything better?
Well, especially I feel like even in this past week with the shooting of Kirk, it's like literally Maura Healey was like, we got to fly the flag at half staff for a freaking white supremacist. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? It's just like, Jeff's raising like how the almost like record level of low support for the Democrats, and they have no issue with the right, not a problem at all. In Massachusetts, I mean, a good number of us in ISG are in Massachusetts, but like I'm in the teachers union. We don't have the right to strike. We're in one of the bluest states in the country, and we don't have the right to strike. And when, like, I think 9 of our union locals in the teachers unions have gone on strike in the past couple of years because, I mean, for a lot of reasons, but like the pay is atrocious. We're not getting increases that keep up with inflation. Our schools are super understaffed, underfunded. Our paras, I repeat this a bunch because it's just shocking just how bad things are, but like 80% of our paraeducators make under $30,000 a year. Municipal workers in Massachusetts are allowed to be paid under minimum wage. I didn't know about that until the Marblehead educators went on strike last year. And literally in their contract, they're making $11 for the cafeteria paras. Stevie, absolutely right. Yeah, the Democrats not here for us. I helped try to organize some protests. We organized a protest when Roe was rolled back. Democrats didn't do anything. They had so many opportunities under Biden, under Obama, under Clinton, probably others as well, to codify Roe, and they refuse to do that. And they use it to dangle over our heads to try to like get us to vote for them, but they don't actually, ensure these rights at all. And they're letting the right grow. Currently, under Trump, they're not in opposition. They're just another, like the corporations, the rich, they have 2 parties to represent them, and we've got nothing. And that's why it's so hard in the US. Why do we not have universal health care? Why? And our unions, by and large, like spending our union dues on the Democratic Party, mostly. I think it's something like 90%, but don't quote me on that. Just an utter waste because, and kind of self-sabotage, I would say, because that could go toward a workers' party of some kind, a working class party of our own, where we actually can get together with other unions, like put forward platforms, talk about that. I think the Democratic State Convention or something like that happened just yesterday out in Springfield, I believe. And they're talking about the platform. Well, we were talking with some Green Party folks the other day about how they've removed some pretty key big demands. I forget exactly about what, Jeff, if you remember. But they're rolling things back. They're rolling even, the like butter up language that Stevie's talking about. They're even like pulling back on that and becoming even more right than they are. I think being very clear about the Democrats, I think that's something that's really, really necessary and a big way in which we can help a lot of people get organized, especially the young people who do, I think, see if they don't have a future. It looks really bleak. And I mean, I definitely would say to folks like that, like, get organized, like join ISG. Like we need folks to not just be online and posting about things and being frustrated. I mean, that's great and all. I mean, there's so much anger against Trump, but how do we actually coalesce that into something that can have power and have the ability to take on Trump? There's a lot we can do.
Yeah, if I could also piggyback on this point too, since we're dunking on the Democrats, which is great. For me, as I mentioned earlier, that the Iraq War was my turning point. Back then, I would consider myself to be kind of liberal-ish. I was a big Howard Dean fan at the time. Parents ask your kids. Kids ask your parents. They're not going to. That guy, he did a Scream once, and doing a Scream canceled you out for being president. Boy, things have changed. But for me, once I did my research on the situation in Iraq, and I'm like, wow, I don't think Iraq doesn't have weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, had no ties to Al Qaeda. I'm like 20. I'm like, I figured this out. I'm surely the Democrats will stand up and be against this BS war and everything. And Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, who was a 2004 nominee for all these Democrats voted for war. And the ones who voted against it eventually got like Dennis Kucinich, I was a fan of at the time. He got gerrymandered out of existence. The anti-war people, Phil Donahue, who was a CNN host at the time, he had a show. They canceled his show. You saw the media shut every anti-war voice out of the out of the conversation. And that was my whole realization that the Democrats are a part of this problem too. that they're not that, and it's not changed at all, not in any way. I mean, I know Peggy brought up Governor Healy, the Democratic governor of Massachusetts. When the teachers' unions went on strike, a few of them, it's illegal for them to go on strike. Maura Healey was against them going on strike. She's like, get back to work. You know, this is the most pro-union party we have, and she's against the teachers' union going on strike. Also, it was a Massachusetts legislator. We have one of the highest minimum wages in the country. And that was done because of ballot questions. The Democrats have a supermajority in the state. They have the House, both chambers of the House. They have the governor, and they have the state Supreme Court. And they would not raise the minimum wage. It took, and I helped work on it with Raise Up Massachusetts, a good grassroots organization with labor unions and everything, to change it by ballot question. And we had to go out and do it and have them vote because the Democrats won't do it. And then when we had to raise it again because it wasn't keeping up with it, there was a thing called the Grand Compromise, because we were going to get on the ballot and we were going to win again. But they compromised because the capitalists didn't like it. The little business associations, the Chamber of Commerce got big mad. So they made a compromise. We'll give you, these pay raises, which were going to happen by ballot question, we're going to do that. But every retail worker who gets time, I worked at a supermarket too when I was a kid. In Massachusetts, you got time and a half. We're going to get rid of time and a half because that's going to make all the big, it was mostly grocery stores and retail people. So they sold out thousands of workers, and time and a half on Sundays is how a lot of people get by. That was a pay cut that the Democrats gave, and it was all passed by them. All of them. It was a majority. It wasn't even close. So that was your Democratic Party. And then it's not just Massachusetts Democrats who suck, but Gavin Newsom. He had single-payer health care. It passed the legislature in California. Supermajority there as well. Gavin Newsom, who will be probably the Democratic nominee for president, he vetoed single-payer health care for California. You have the Connecticut legislature, Democratic majority. They pass unemployment for striking workers. It goes to the governor's desk, who's a Democrat. He vetoes unemployment pay for striking workers. The Democratic Party does not support the working class. All right. They have to be pressured to do anything. They're more easier to pressure there, but they're not for us. They're for the rich. They're for the small business owners. You know, the old phrase, Wall Street has two political parties. We need one of our own. The Democrats are just that. And anybody who tries to think they can change the Democrats from within, I can point you to AOC, who voted to fund the Iron Dome, who refunded the police, and who broke the railway worker strike in 2022. The Democratic Party has a good way of taking you over. Even if you have the best intentions, it's not going to work. Or AIPAC will give $20 million to run a campaign against Jamal Bowman to make sure you're not going to be doing it. It's like the police. You can't change the police from inside. They will kick people out. They don't do it. The Democratic Party is not for us. They are a class enemy, and we have to treat them as such. We need to tell people that there's an alternative to the system, and it's the independent socialist group that is the way to go forward, because we do need this.
We are Independent Socialist Group on pretty much all platforms. The quickest way to get in touch with our sort of written out what we stand for platform is by going to independentsocialistgroup.org. That has all sorts of amazing stuff, all of our publications and pamphlets, links to donations and contact information, and our newspaper, which is called Socialism Today. Just got our new editions hot off the presses, which many of us on this call have contributed to. That is where you want to go. It's independentsocialistgroup.org. We are organized in lots of places in the country, largely in the sort of New England area at the moment, but we want you to join the fight regardless. There's ways for you to contribute, and we want to get in touch. So one of the ways to do it is to go to our website or find some of our material, either that's the newspaper, that's a pamphlet you found, that's some outreach, and you can fill out the contact form on that website. There's lots of different ways to get in touch, but we encourage you to do so because you need to get mad, get organized, and join the fight with us here at the Independent Socialist Group. Thank you so much for listening.